Welcome to this week's video, everybody. I'm in the great outdoors on my mountain bike doing some riding. So this week's video is all about type 1 diabetes. Yes, I've got it. I was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 7 and I've always been an active person. I've always been an outdoors person. I like running, I like road cycling, I like long bike rides, I like mountain biking. I also like hill walking, hiking, and all things just outdoors and being active. So I thought, whilst this is not really 100% related to my channel, it kind of is because I'm diabetic and I like to get outdoors and do a lot of exercise. So this week's video is my sort of top tips on how to manage diabetes whilst you're outdoors, exercising, running, cycling, whatever it is you want to do. And I'll just talk about my experiences and what I do when I'm doing exercise and when I'm outdoors. What this video is not, so a little bit of a disclaimer, I'm not a medical expert at all. I've just simply had diabetes for the past 29 years. I was diagnosed at the age of 7, I turned 36 and went to just gone, so that's 29 years of diabetes. But I'm not a medical expert, so always seek advice off your medical expert, your GP, your doctor, or your nurse, or whatever it is you see for your diabetes. But I thought this might be useful for anyone who wants to get into exercise or just going outdoors or going camping or walking or hiking, to give you my experience with getting out there despite your diabetes and just getting some exercise or even training and racing. Last weekend I did a 5k and I'll go through a little bit of how I manage my blood sugars. My camera is going everywhere. I need to get a GoPro for this, really. But I was just going to go through what I did with my blood sugars for that 5k race, and also what I kind of do for cycling, hill walking and camping. This bit of the video is going to be so bumpy. So let's get started. Right then, I've pulled up because, quite frankly, that bike mount for this camera is rubbish and it was wobbling everywhere, as you can probably tell from the video. So I'm pulled up in a nice little quiet spot and let's talk about diabetes and exercise. Nowhere to put my bike, so I just leaned it against the bushes. Yeah. She'll be alright. Alright, basically I'm in a farmer's field. I'm only about 4 miles from home, so no real wild adventures this week, but I thought it might be really nice to do a video on type 1 diabetes and exercise and just being outdoors in general, because I've been diabetic in stage of 7. It's something I manage every day, and while it's not, as I said earlier, related to the channel as such, it's not camping or wild camping or being in the wild outdoors, it is something close to my heart because I do a lot of exercise, and I will be putting bike videos and running videos up and stuff like that eventually when the channel grows a little bit more. So I thought I would talk a little bit about my type 1 diabetes and how I manage that with exercise and just generally getting outdoors. What do I do with my blood sugars? What do I do with my insulin? How do I stop hypos? How do I stop going so high? Or whatever it is you might be going through. If you're new to exercise, great. This will give you some instruction. But as I said earlier, don't follow this as medical advice. It's not medical advice. Always seek help from your medical professionals. They might not even agree with some of the things I say in this video. You might not agree with some of the things that I say in this video, because a lot of the time diabetes is personal, related to you. So what I do and say and what works for me definitely might not work for everyone. In fact, I'm 100% it won't, because I've heard many contrasting things about diabetes and exercise. But I thought it'd be useful if I went through what I do with my blood sugars and my insulin and all that stuff whilst I'm doing exercise, and I'll go through little different forms of exercise as well. Some of you might be wondering why exercise at all. Well, I mean, it's just great. It just gets the stress out of you. It's really good for your mental health. You know, even if you just go for a walk, as my other video said about, you know, mental health and walking a couple of weeks back, just walking's great for exercising. But, you know, going for a run, going for a bike ride, getting yourself out of breath, feeling a little bit of adrenaline, because you might be doing something a little bit risky, like riding a bike through a big trail. It's just great for your mental health. So I recommend, and diabetes, you know, I recommend it to anyone, but diabetics especially, because it will help your blood sugars over time if you sort of exercise regularly and routinely. Although you do have to manage your hypos and highs while you're exercising, overall your blood sugars will be a lot better. So a little bit about me. Why am I qualified to talk about this? Well, as I said, I've been diabetic since the age of 7 years old. I started off as, you know, somebody who was just a very young child, so I don't know any different. I know diabetes as kind of just a thing I've got, and I've never really known any different. I can't remember being not diabetic. I started off as a teenager, terrible control, didn't really care about it. My mum and dad were great when I was a kid. They looked after me really well, but when I became a teenager and I had to look after it myself, I didn't really look after it. I didn't really care. It's the social aspect really. I didn't want people to know I had it, and I just pretended it and I hid it away. As I got to my early 20s, I then started getting, worried about the impact of that on my health. So I did start looking after it and looking at my blood sugars more, testing my blood sugars, caring about my HbA1c results, etc, etc. And nowadays I'm on a DIY closed loop system, so I use an insulin pump and a Dexcom One, and they all link together through the DIY closed loop system. Obviously, eventually I think we'll all be on that if that's what you want to go down. I will cover insulin pens in this video as well, but also a lot about the pump and general usage of the pump and how good that is when you're exercising. It's a lot better these days. When I was younger and I'd go on a bike ride, I'd just be hypo every 5 minutes because I just couldn't reduce my insulin. But nowadays with your insulin pump, you can reduce your background insulin, and that can prevent hypos and whatnot. So my first point about exercising with type 1 diabetes, and this could be any exercise whatsoever, whether that's walking, cycling, running, climbing, anything that it is that you do, your basal rates are one of the most important things to think about. Now, it's going to be different for different types of exercise. So if I go for a 30-minute easy run, I don't necessarily need to reduce my basal a lot. I might just reduce it by 20%, half an hour before I go on a run, because I know I'm not really exerting myself that much. I'm just on an easy jog, and I don't necessarily need to maybe reduce it any further than 20%. However, if I am going on a long bike ride, like a 3-hour bike ride, or I'm going on a hard run or a longer run, or I'm going to do a 6-hour, 7-hour hill walk, or whatever it is, and longer or harder exercise, then I just switch my basal completely off. So for example, last night I went on a 3.5 mile tempo run, so it was just a sort of a faster paced run, and basically I just thought that's going to exert quite a lot of energy, burn a lot of glucose, so I'm going to switch my insulin off completely, and I just switched my basal off, and I can do that on my pump. I've got the Omnipod pump, so I can just go onto the pump dashboard and I can just switch my basal off completely. I did that half an hour before the run, and I kept it going during the run, and then I just evaluated when I got in. Now it also depends on what your blood sugars are before you exercise. So if I'm 15, 16 before I exercise, sometimes you might think it's not worthwhile going out because that could be a bit risky if you've got ketones. So always check for ketones if you've got high blood sugars, and never exercise if you've got ketones, because that is absolutely dangerous. But reducing your basal is absolutely key. Now you can do that with pens as well, so you can do that with an insulin pen. So you could just, your morning basal dose, you could just halve it if you know you're going to exercise that day. It's a little bit more tricky with a pen because you only take it once, twice a day maybe. So you do have to really pre-plan when you're on pens. I used to have to do that when I was on basal injections. But that doesn't mean to say you can't do it. You just think about when you're going to exercise and maybe plan a little bit better. However, if you're on a pump or you're on a looping system, you can just adjust your basal. You can have an exercise profile, and you can load that profile in when you're doing different types of exercise. So if you know you're going on a bike ride tomorrow, an hour before you go on the bike ride, you might just load in your exercise profile for bike ride, and you've already pre-programmed your basal rates. The important thing is to figure out what works for you. What works for me isn't necessarily going to work for you. So I basically, most of the time, I switch my basal off completely. If I'm walking, I might reduce it by 20%. If it's a strenuous walk up hills, mountains, I'll turn it off completely until my blood sugars start rising, and I'll just evaluate from there. But you've got to find what works for you. It's all about experimentation. But I will say, reducing the basal and using your technology like your Dexcom sensor with your blood sugar readings on your phone or your watch is absolutely incredible, because you can see when your blood sugars are dropping. So you know that when you're on a long bike ride or a run, you can check your blood sugars, and you can take in carbs, or you can take in some glucose if that's what you want or need to do. So it's fantastic. Use your technology, but definitely reduce your basal when you're exercising, because that will be a life changer for you in your preparation for exercise, or just getting out there and exercising in any form whatsoever. Consuming carbs is also quite important, particularly if it's a long form of exercise. So if you're going on a six-hour bike ride, or you're doing a long climbing session, or you're going on a long walk, it's very important that you eat, not just because of your diabetes, also because you need to eat to consume some energy so that you can expend it. does get a bit tricky when you're trying to lose weight. That's not my area really. I'm exercising for racing and for good health and fitness. I don't need to lose weight personally. But if you're trying to lose weight, that is a little bit tricky, because obviously you might be going hypo and you may need to consume some carbs, and the goal of your exercise might be to drop some weight, and that's a bit tricky. So you do have to manage that a little bit, and that's where that basal reduction can come in. But make sure whatever you do, wherever you're going, on a run, 2 miles from home, a mile from home, or on a long bike ride, you make sure you take some hypo treatments and take enough. Don't just take 1 or 2, take a full pack of sweets. Now I'm a road cyclist, and that adds a lot of weight to my bag and to my you know, going up hills and whatnot. But I have to do it because I could be caught out easily. You can have back-to-back hypos when you're doing exercise like that, and you just don't want to be caught out in that situation where you've got nothing to treat it with. It's absolutely dangerous. So make sure. Now, if you're going on a short run or a little walk nearby your house, 1 or 2 hypo treatments would be probably enough. But if you're going particularly if you're going on a long exercise, make sure you take at least a packet of sweets with you, and something that's going to sustain your blood sugars a little bit more, like some pan au chocolate, or whatever it is, some flapjack. Especially if you're going cycling long distance or long distance running, just have them carbs with you. But just general exercise, walk around your house, or 2 mile, 3 mile run, just make sure you've got some hypo treatments with you. That's super important. One thing that is always a bit tricky when you're exercising, especially when you're doing a long exercise, a few hours or more, is your bolus, and what to do with your bolus. So when I go on a long bike ride, and I'll have dinner out, so I'll have breakfast before I leave, and I'll take half bolus, so 50% less bolus. That's what is advised, it's recommended, but you find your own. You might say no bolus or 30% bolus. For me, it's 50%. But then when you're out and I stop a few hours later and I have some beans on toast and a coffee, what do I do with my bolus? In honesty, it's quite impossible to figure out. Sometimes it's different, and it's based on trial and error. So what worked last time for me might not work the next time. It's based on trial and error. But what I will say with your bolus is you can easily correct later on. You don't want to go hypo whilst you're out exercising. It's the worst thing you can sort of put up with, especially if it's a crash after a meal. So always go, in my opinion, with less bolus, and then you can correct a bit later on. And naturally, you're exercising anyway, and if you're on a long form of exercise, your blood sugars will just generally come down automatically anyway. So even if you do take a little bit less bolus after a meal whilst you're out exercising, let it come down itself, and if it doesn't, just take fractions of bolus. Don't take too much, in my opinion. But in terms of your local, you're just your 3 mile run, or you're just going out on a jog, or you're going to track, or you're going to play football, or whatever it is you're doing just for half hour, go in the gym. Some people don't take the normal bolus after exercise. The only time I don't is when I'm doing anything long, like a 6 hour bike ride or an 8 hour hike. I don't take my full bolus then. But if I'm just doing a short run, like last night I did, a training run, and I took my normal bolus with my tea, and that's what I find. Nearly been attacked by a wasp, and that's what I find works for me, because otherwise I just go high, and I don't really need to adjust my bolus for just like an hour in the gym, or half an hour running, or a 5k, or a little walk. But if I do find myself on a long form of exercise, like a long bike ride all day or a long walk all day, I'll definitely reduce my bolus, sometimes by up to 50%. So if I'm having 50 grams of carbs, I might take 25 grams of bolus based on my carb ratio and whatever that is. So that links into post-exercise as well, what to do after post-exercise. To be honest with you, for me, not really a lot. It's just a case for me, it's managing hypo. So last night when I got in from a training run, my blood sugars were going down. Despite me reducing my basal, my blood sugars were reaching 4s. And usually that's an indication that you are going to go hypo, especially if you've done some exercise. So it's about keeping an eye on it for me. I don't need to reduce my bolus or my basal after exercise unless it's been an overly strenuous bit of exercise that's lasted a long time and I'm in recovery from. If it's just a short run, I don't need to do anything except just monitor my hypos. So if my blood sugars are dropping towards the 4s, I'm just going to take a hypo treatment, because at worst you're just going to go up a little bit high, but it will naturally come down later on. In my opinion, for me anyway, I don't need to do much after exercise except just focus on my recovery and just watch out for hypos. However, if it is a particularly strenuous exercise, like time trialing on a road bike, for example, that used to make me go hypo overnight, because it's so strenuous on your body and you're recovering from it all night, so that's going to burn, you know, unnecessarily amounts of carbs. So yeah, just in summary, I mean, I don't really need to do much after exercise unless it's one of those time trials I mentioned earlier where I just crash every night. So I just reduce my overnight basal by like 30 or 40%. But again, it's all about what works for you. You have to trial and error, you have to find what works for you. But these are just little tips that I do, so you know, just don't worry too much. For example, if you do reduce your basal half an hour before you run like I do, or turn it off completely and then just keep it turned off during the exercise and then turn it back on afterwards, which is what I do most of the time, try it. But if it doesn't work, just try something else. Like if you go too high, then maybe just reduce your basal by 50% instead of turning it off. For me, I'm just so sensitive to insulin, and I'm also on FIASP, so it's a little bit different depending on what insulin you're on and also how sensitive you are for, you know, your insulin. So I'm very sensitive to insulin, so I just turn it off during exercise most of the time. And then if it's a long form of exercise, I'll just bring it back up later on, because obviously if I turn it off all day, I will just go dead high. But if it's just a short run, I turn it off half an hour before and then keep it turned off during the run, and then I'll turn it back on when I get back home. So yeah, just look after yourself in that respect. Don't go, you know, beating yourself up if you've done what I've suggested, or you know, you found your own way and then it doesn't work, because sometimes things change as well depending on temperature. You might be more sensitive or less sensitive to insulin depending on temperature or what else you've done in the day, or whether you're sick or whatever. So yeah, always just experiment and just go for it, you know, just manage and just track with your blood sugar graphs, just track what's happening on your exercise, where you're dropping and how long it takes to drop and all that type of stuff. So what to carry on when you're exercising? Well, I've already covered this really, but I kind of guess you just got to make sure you're carrying hypo treatment, but also, you know, if you're on an insulin pump, and especially if it's a longer bit of exercise, you know, if you're going out on a short run, you don't necessarily need to take a spare pen because you're only a short distance from home. But if you're going on a long walk, or you're going somewhere that's going to take a long time, or you're going on a long all-day bike ride, I would absolutely suggest that you take a spare insulin pen and a blood sugar monitor as well. Because if your blood sugar system fails, or your pump fails, or something falls off, you're going to be snookered, because you're not going to know your hypo or going high or whatever it is. So I'd recommend on short forms of exercise, just carrying some hypo treatments, and also your mobile phone. Yeah, so you can, you know, keep track of your blood sugars, but also contact someone if you are struggling and you need a lift home, because that could happen. It could happen, you know, you could have a crippling hypo and you can't really run, and you find yourself like 2 miles from home and you've got to walk back. And also, you know, emergency contact details. Now I've got this tattoo, there we go, but also wear a bracelet if you can, just to say that you've got diabetes. And if you're in like a running club or a gym, maybe tell someone that you're diabetic if you feel like you need to, because it's very important, because you could collapse or whatever and then nobody knows that you're diabetic, and that can be quite risky. So yeah, always tell someone, tell the people you're with. If you're with a club or you're with people you know, just tell them that you're diabetic, and that covers all bases then. So if they do need help, they know, you know, you're diabetic, and they can call an ambulance if necessary or whatever. So just be careful about that, and always tell someone, or carry identification with you, or get a tattoo like I have. So obviously the most important discussion point is the actual impact that exercise can have on your blood sugars and on your long-term diabetes control. So obviously it can become very stressful when you're sort of managing your blood sugars and your insulin while you're out exercising. And sometimes you can think, well, this is supposed to be better for me, but actually it's making my blood sugar control quite difficult. And it does, but long-term, the impact on your HbA1c and your time in range, it makes it all worthwhile. You know, you do get lower blood sugars and you get better control just being active and keeping yourself busy and doing running or cycling, or even just walking, or just going to the gym for a couple of hours a week. It really does wonders on your time in range. My time in range is really good at the moment. I'm on the DIY closed loop, so to be honest with you, it would probably be good anyway, but it does keep your blood sugars flatlined. You know, things like swimming are really good actually. When I go swimming in the gym, my blood sugars just stay flat the whole night afterwards. It's really good. And when I go running, where it does get a little bit tricky is when you're racing. So that the last part of this video is going to be discussing my race last week, which I did in a 5k with basically a local running club host it. So I did that race last week, so I'm going to detail that at the very end, just to go through how I did in the race and sort of how I manage the blood sugars. But yeah, it can be up and down, and it can be really difficult, and you can think, well, I'm supposed to be doing this exercise to make me feel healthy, but it's actually making my blood sugars worse. But that's just momentary thoughts. Long term, it will have excellent impact on your blood sugars control, and your health, and the mental health benefits you get with exercise is absolutely astronomically amazing. So as much as it feels stressful while you're running and figuring out what to do with your insulin and what to do with your blood sugars, it will have a good impact on your overall time in range and your target blood sugars. I currently am around 79-80% in range. That's not the best, and to be honest, I've had a rough couple of months, and that's my rough couple of months these days with the DIY closed loop that I'm on. And I have had up to nearly 90%, so I just need to tweak things again to get back to that 90% in the next 3 months. But some of that does come from exercise. Some of that comes from being active, going out and running, going out and walking. I at least walk every day. I also go to the gym. I'm also getting attacked by flies and bees and wasps here. I'm just in a farmer's field. It's beautiful, but very buggy. So yeah, I do at least a walk every day, and I do 3 or 4 runs a week, and I try and get a bike ride in. It's a busy life, but squeezing them things around your job is going to do wonders for your blood sugar, so I absolutely recommend it. And kind of the last part of this video, I just wanted to talk about the 5k race that I did last week, because some people might be interested in that. So last week I did a race. So basically I'm not really in the best shape at the moment anyway, so I've been injured over summer, so I'm just getting back into running, sort of. I've been running for about 6 weeks, but only about 6 miles, 7 miles a week, just because of that injury that I got. It was a non-running related injury, surprisingly. But I am back into it now, and I wanted to do a 5k race just to test my 5k pace so I can tailor my training around it. And I've also joined a club, so I'm going to be doing club track from next week, and I'd obviously like to, you know, tailor my pace correctly while I'm doing club track. During a race, what do you do with your blood sugars? Okay, so like anything, any form of exercise, I simply just monitored what my blood sugar levels were in the morning. So I got up around 7:30, checked my blood sugars and had some breakfast. So I had some porridge, because that's really good for your blood sugars. It sustains your blood sugars quite well. But it did make me spike, which is unfortunate. I turned my basal off half an hour before the race, did my warm up, and then kept my basal off. But my blood sugars, as I got to the start line, started raising to like 14, 15. Now that would have had an impact on probably my pace and the race itself, because if you've got high blood sugars kind of above 13, 14, that will impact your race. It will impact your ability to actually race. I don't want to say it did, because I don't like to use my diabetes as an excuse. However, it does, reality is it does impact on your racing. What I didn't do, so I could have been tempted to take a bit of insulin there to bring them sugars down so that it didn't impact my race, but I know full well what would have happened there is it would have gone straight down to a hypo. And because it was a race, I thought, you know what, I'm going to be burning this porridge off in this race anyway, and so there's no need to take any bolus. So whilst I was quite high at the start line, after the race, and I did quite a rapid pace. It was well, not the best. I'm going for sub 20-minute 5k, hopefully by the end of the year. So at the moment I'm on 22 minutes, and that's what pace I did last Saturday. So that's 7 minutes 10 per mile. And that, because that was such that was the max I could have done. So because of the intensity of that particular race, the blood sugars did just come down on their own. So despite being high at the start, unfortunately, there's nothing really I could do about it, but the race itself brought the sugars down, and by the time I'd finished the race, my blood sugars were sort of back to 9, 10, 11, and then it just came down, and I ended up going hypo later on as well, despite me turning my basal off. If you've got any questions, please feel free to message me, and you know, or comment, and or check my email out in the channel description, because I'm absolutely satisfied that I've got, you know, enough experience to give people advice on this, because I've been diabetic for so long and I've always exercised and been outdoors. There won't be that many diabetes videos on the channel, but I will from time to time, because I am diabetic, be popping some up. So I'm going to do some videos on wild camping with diabetes, or going hiking in the wilderness with diabetes, which can be quite a big planning process, if you like, because you're in the wilderness, so you've got to have everything with you. But if you do need some help or some further comments on anything I've mentioned in this video, or you just need a little bit of advice and guidance on getting started, please just comment on the video. You can go to my channel description, find the email and send me an email, and I'll answer any emails. I'm happy to talk via social media if that's what you want to do. I've got a diabetic account on Twitter, you can follow me on that, and there's a really amazing diabetic community on Twitter as well, or I should say X, shouldn't I? And we can message on there. But if you do want any help or assistance or guidance, then just message on there and we can go from there. But thank you for listening to my video this week. As always, you can like and subscribe just to support the channel so that I can produce more and more and more content. Next week's video will be wild camping related, and I'll be reviewing some wild camping meals. So that should be exciting and very informative as well. But for now, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you got what you needed from the video. make sure you share it, and if you know anyone with diabetes who could help and benefit from this, do share it with them, because that's why I've done it. I'm not getting any money from this. This is just to give people some advice and guidance on diabetes and exercise. I'm not an expert, but I hope you got something from it. And if you do want any further questions answered, or you want to talk to me, emails on the channel description, or simply leave a comment. Thank you and good night.